Hi, welcome to Thinking Constellationally. I'm your host, Stephanie Sena, and this is USA LA Media. We are starting late today. However, while the on-air show will stop at 12, it will continue on for until we've spoken for an hour on our live YouTube site, and then it will also be a full hour re-aired twice more this week and in our regular podcast. So welcome again to our show, where we connect the dots between systems of oppression and between ourselves and our neighbors. I have a really special guest. I know I say that every week, but this week it's actually true. My guest today in the studio with me is Heather Boyd. Heather is my best friend, and I will be interviewing her today about her work in politics and advocacy and momming and doing everything she can to make a more just community and world for us and our neighbors and our children. But if you want to know anything about me, that's too bad. I'm only going to ask her about her. So anyway, I am so excited to have you in the studio, Heather. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me, Stephanie. It's very fun to see your new experience.
Yes.
So this is going to be fun.
This is fun. So I'll just tell the listeners a little bit about our history. Heather and I met in grad school when we were doing postgraduate work at University of Delaware in the history department, and that was in 2005 and 6, maybe, I think. My mom says, "Hi, Heather." And so then we finished that, and we have been incredibly close ever since. And I have watched you, Heather, as you have grown and into the person you are today. And I've watched you learn, and I've watched you struggle and get angry and get active. I've watched you run a marathon.
You ran some of it with me.
I did. If you can count that as running.
You complained the entire time.
I will say, so, all right, oh my God, I'll give a little background on the marathon run. So Heather and I both had children close in age. Heather's firstborn is 6 months younger than my firstborn. And so we were going through that together and helping each other through that. And then Heather decided to get active. And I was like, why?
The YMCA has free 2-hour childcare if you go work out there. So I joined the Y for the 2-hour childcare.
That's exactly right. And I then saw that that Heather was doing that and became inspired to do that as well. And I would run there literally just to run away from my children.
Yes.
Yeah. And then Heather started to literally run marathons, and she would train for the Marine Corps marathon by running laps around my house. And every once in a while we would run together, but I'm a terrible runner. And I would, sometimes when she was running past my house, I would leave pitchers of water and little signs that would say, "Go, Heather, go." And then I would run out every once in a while to see if you had been by to drink the water, and if so, refill it.
It was really nice.
It was sweet. And I loved watching you train for that. You were so goal-oriented and had your heart set on it. And I was so proud of you.
Well, do you remember why I ran the marathon?
Remind me.
It was not a health-related. In fact, I would never want to run a marathon, and I have never run one since. You and I had a child at the same time, but a girlfriend of mine had a child about 1.5 years before I did. And her child was diagnosed with a very rare form of leukemia, I think it was. It's known as JMML. And she called me and said, "Would you raise money by running this marathon for this advocacy organization that's helping children with my child's disease?" And then her child passed away. And of course, how do you say no to another mother who's facing that situation? And so I was like, screw it, I'm going to run. And I was not a runner, and I'm still not a runner. So it was really important to me how many more people like you came in and helped in that situation, because it was a hard situation, and it was a hard 26 point whatever miles a marathon is a long way to run, but it was raising money, and you did that too with me, and we ran that because we were moms and advocates already.
That's amazing. I had completely forgotten about that.
Yeah.
And it's having that context is really important because part of what I want to talk to you about today is your evolution into the strong activist you are. And for me, I think this of myself, and I think you would probably feel similarly, that my activism really crystallized when I became a mom.
Yes.
Yeah.
We used to say becoming a mother radicalized me.
Absolutely, and me as well. And I just remember that happening to both of us together, and I was so learning from you and inspired by you. When you finally did run that marathon, I was so proud, and I organized a bunch of our friends in as a surprise to go to DC, and we arranged for us to be positioned at different parts of the marathon and to hop in with you at various miles and run with you for a few miles and then tag the next person who would jump in. But you never knew like who the next runner would be. So I was at mile 9 and I remember waiting so
In
impatiently.
Georgetown.
Yes,
We were in Georgetown.
that's right. Yeah. And I remember you approaching mile 9 and then jumping in, and our friend Bess Williamson, who was there too, snapped a picture of that moment where I jumped in, and I think I'll put that up on my feed when I share the podcast link, because that was one of the most important moments of my life. I think that was a really defining moment for me. And we ran those 3 miles together. And by run I mean jog, and by jog I mean walk quickly, and by walk quickly I mean walked. And I
think I encouraged you those 3
yes,
miles more than you.
yes,
But
yes.
you being there with me was very helpful. It
Even-
really was.
I'm sorry that I complained the entire 3 miles.
I've met you.
Amazing. And it was just so exciting. All of us who were there to celebrate you and to cheer you on were incredibly proud of you, but also so inspired by you as we continue to be, Heather. So that was really meaningful. So I'm glad that I got the opportunity to tell that story again because I love it so much.
Thanks.
Can you talk a little bit about this evolution that I mentioned in terms of your life as an activist, what propelled you forward, and that kind of journey, if you could?
Well, thank you for that. I'd never really thought of myself as an activist, actually. I, like you, we were in graduate school and we were studying history, and history itself is a field full of conflict and resolution and, ideas for things you can do well and things you can't, or things that went badly. And it was something that I was really interested in, but in a theoretical sense or in an academic one. And then Barack Obama got elected to president. And I was ecstatic, and my children have never known a day when a black man wasn't president. And that was a really exciting moment for me. And I thought, we're on a trajectory towards progress. And I know that he would say that the arc of progress is long and it bends slowly. And I agree to that. I agree with him on that. But then we lost Congress in 2010. And I just thought, it felt like a wall. It felt like hitting a wall. I had one child, a second child, just born actually. And I thought, what is this world going to look like if all these things that I thought that we were moving towards, including a more inclusive community, a more, open, honest conversation about race, a more just more, I hold the values of the Democratic Party very dearly. And when he was elected, I thought he was a very good representation of those values. And then I was afraid in 2010 that we would not move forward. I was worried about healthcare. I was worried about immigration. I was worried about housing. I was worried about education. And so I sought out how I could be helpful. Like, how can I be helpful in this process, or how can I, affect change? So I started looking for my Democratic Party in Delaware County in 2010, and very quickly learned that it was not easy to access. I lived in Upper Darby, and Upper Darby is the largest municipality in Delaware County, and yet the Democratic Party was just not that organized yet. When I think back to who was involved then, now that I know them very well, they were visionaries and lions and like really fighting hard for some really important work, but they just were fighting a very big, what I learned later, a very corrupt political machine in Delaware County and in Upper Darby. So it was hard to find. And I found someone who helped me and helped, was a very strong support for me, which is Barbara Ann Keffer, who is now just elected the mayor of Upper Darby.
Wow.
So the world is, for me, changed significantly. But I was looking for places to plug in, and the Democratic Party seemed like the right place to start. It was not the only place because there are only two parties in the United States mostly, and they have very big tents, and we don't all share values all the time. So I was able to plug in there and start talking to my neighbors. And 5 years later, I decided that I had to get even more involved, and I ran for school board.
And what year was that?
2015.
Okay.
Yeah. 2014, I decided to help some other people get elected, and we weren't successful that year because 2014 for Democrats was a real challenge. We were able to get Tom Wolf elected to governor, but nothing else. And the one thing I seriously learned, and I think we've all been experiencing very acutely, you can't just get one person elected. One person doesn't fix it. Barack Obama didn't fix it. Tom Wolf can't fix things. And, we do need to have a groundswell of both public opinion, really strong elected officials willing to fight and maybe even contradict each other, even if they're in the same party. And we have to have thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people raising their voices about an issue. The biggest issue that has mattered to both of us for a very long time has been public education funding here in Pennsylvania. And it was the reason we got Tom Wolf elected, was to make those changes. And I think he made a very valiant first few year effort. But if you don't have a House of Representatives that'll work with you, if you don't have a Senate that'll work with you, they have been unwilling so far and still held in majority Republican control, both bodies in the state, then he can't do it alone. And so I just really learned that it was very important to have one-on-one conversations and get advocates and activists and to help activate every person that you're talking to at the doors and get them to engage. And some of them have run for office and won since that process that I've been part of has started, because no one person has been able to do it single-handedly, and they're not supposed to. That's what democracy is for.
I've seen such a massive shift in Delaware County since you got involved, and I think it's because of you, obviously.
No. So coincidentally, we have one of the worst president in our history, and I think it has activated a lot of people. But the one thing I will say, while I appreciate that you would give me that any kind of credit there, the structure that they could plug into was better. So in 2016, when the worst political moment of my life happened, the people who activated and responded to that, I was part of organizing a group with a number of other people. I would never say that it was me alone, but organized a organization of what do we do now. And we started it by planning to have it in the library in media, which holds like 50 people. And we started getting all of these RSVPs. We had to change locations 3 times until we finally held it in the Strathaven Middle School. And it was standing room only, and it holds 600 people.
Wow. Amazing.
So from November election in 2016 to this moment, the second week of January in 2017, like, what do we do now? How do we activate? Those people then had a structure to plug into in the Democratic Party. And many of them did not go on to work within the Democratic Party. They ended up being part of the indivisible groups. They ended up doing the women's huddles. They ended up being action networks in all kinds of ways that weren't necessarily related to the structure of the political party, but created structures and offered structures for when I'm at the doors talking to a parent saying, what do I do? And I say, well, here are the 5 organizations that you can connect to now, because you care about women's health, because you care about gun violence, because you care about public education funding. those didn't exist in Delaware County yet.
And you were really influential in making that happen, I think, and in getting people involved in getting these systems so that people could plug in to, and be connected to issues that matter to them.
Well, it's the thing that I wanted to do the most. I would say that I could list off dozens and dozens of names of people, Vince Rangione, Barbara Ann Keffer, Laura Wentz, Scott Alberts, hugely in Upper Darby. Delaware County would be Colleen Guiney and Leanne Kruger and Joe Corrigan and John Kane and David Landau and Monica Taylor. I mean, people who really, and that's such small lists. Like, I'm doing that off the top of my head, and I'm sure there are dozens more, who offered opportunities and understood that if you don't have structure to something for people to plug into, if you had 1,000 people raise their hand and want to do something and you don't have something for them to do.
Yep, I do know that. Yeah.
You lose them.
Absolutely. But I am hopeful that I've seen so many people who have wanted to make a difference, and they might say, I don't know where to start, but I know that this is not okay the way that it is now, and
right.
I can be useful.
Yes.
And that's really hopeful. I mean, I remember, there, even when Obama was in office, certain people who were tuned out of politics, like they weren't paying attention. In the women's march after Trump was elected, a woman held up a sign that and it went viral, and her sign said, "If Hillary were elected, we would all be at brunch right now."
Yes.
And that made me angry, because that's the problem, is that is people kind of sitting back and saying, well, the person I elected is in office, and so I don't have to do anything else. So I guess that maybe is the silver lining of having, as you said, the worst president in American history.
And we are American historians.
Yes,
we say
that's
that
right.
With solid
yes,
objectivity.
Solid evidence of that. That he has galvanized people who had never seen themselves as political or as part of the process at all. And that's really exciting, these kind of first-time candidates, the people who are running for the first time, who never saw themselves in that place.
And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them are women.
I love that. So I think we'll talk a little bit more about that when we come back. We're going to take a short break, and I want to hear more about your journey and the journey of you, but also how, Delaware County has also shifted and can be, I think, a model for the rest of the country. So we'll talk about that, and I also want to talk about some of the issues that are close to your heart, specifically women's health, and I think also, as you mentioned, public school funding and gun violence and these issues. So when we come back from a break, we'll talk more about those in depth. So stay right there. We'll be right back.
If you love them enough to suck the snot out of their nose at 4 a.m., then surely you'll check nhtsa.gov/the right seat to make sure they're in the right car seat.
Being prepared is a part of who you are. But it's especially important in the case of a disaster. Be informed about possible emergencies in your area. Make a plan that covers where you go in an emergency. Build a kit with the things you need to survive. There's no one more capable of planning for your situation than you. Start your plan today. Go to ready.gov/myplan.
Okay, thank you, and welcome back to Thinking Constellationally, where we connect the dots between systems of oppression and between ourselves and our neighbors. I'm Stephanie Sena, your host, and I'm here with my favorite guest, Heather Boyd, who has been an incredible inspiration to me as I have learned and grown in my passions and in my advocacy. I consider Heather to be an incredible public servant and someone who is dedicated to making our communities and our children and families healthier and stronger, and our community more just. So I'm so proud of you, Heather, and so grateful that you're joining us today. This is such a pleasure to be talking to you like this. So yeah, if you could talk to me a little bit about all those things I mentioned after break, and whatever area you want to go to. So if you want to talk about the shift in Delaware County recently, that's incredibly exciting, and I am seeing on social media friends from throughout the country who are sharing that news, saying that this provides them hope. In Puerto Rico, that it's providing them hope.
They need hope
in
right
places
now.
all
Yeah.
over the map, that Delaware County has really is leading the way for kind of successful public involvement and engagement, and I think that that's exciting. We can talk about that, or the issues that matter to you most, and your journey in terms of how you got to those places, what you learned along the way, and where we are today, where you hope we can go in the future. So all that's a lot.
All right, let's see. Well, I will start obviously with the historic elections in Delaware County
Great.
in 2019, because I think, first of all, most of your average American voter pays a lot of attention. When they pay attention to elections, they're paying a lot of attention to national ones. And, they obviously see that on TV, and, TV is very expensive, and your average county council person or your average township council person, and surely not your average school board director, is ever going to be on TV. And so the outreach in those ways has to be through one-on-one relationships and conversations. So that is a lot of work. It's just like organizing a lot of people to go knock on doors. And I've been doing that for a number of years, and I know that there are people who have been doing it long before me who just relentlessly go knock thousands of doors every single time that there's a non-presidential or even non-congressional election, because there are years where you don't have there are the off years, like 2018, where we didn't have a presidential election. The top of the ticket was a governor. Obviously, a lot of people care about governors. Some years, the top of the ticket is just the Congress. And sometimes you care about that and sometimes you don't. But the people who affect your life the most, who affect your property taxes, affect the funding for public education, for your local parks, for your roads. They make decisions about housing policy and about, whether your community is a sanctuary community. That's all decided by local elected officials. And I think a lot of people forget that. And so I think having the worst president in the world has at least made people very, very aware of when elections are, because we may not be on TV, but he is, and he angers a lot of people. But I also have the benefit. Stephanie didn't give you my resume, which I appreciate, actually, but I do have the opportunity to work for a congresswoman. I work for Mary Gay Scanlon in the Pennsylvania 5 as her district director, and she had the benefit of being on the Judiciary Committee and being on TV a lot. And I will tell you that just that alone, allows for a lot more people to see and think about their local official. The number of people who say, "That's my congresswoman." Wait a minute, what does she think? What does she say? What does she, what's her opinion? But they wouldn't have really maybe engaged in that if they didn't see her on CNN or MSNBC, but then allows for the opportunity for them to think about local elections. And so in Delaware County, we did have the benefit this year of having a congresswoman. We had the benefit of having so many engaged groups of people, indivisible groups, the, women's huddles, which were the groups that came out of the Women's March. There are still, to this day, women who get together every month, sometimes every week, to address issues about civic engagement, about, women representation by women, about healthcare, women's healthcare, issues that affect just their everyday lives. They're still organizing. Mm-hmm. And I think it probably terrifies Republicans to know how many women are organizing.
They're such snowflakes.
And they're
They're
doing
scared.
and they should be.
Yeah.
They should be. And so I think what happened in Delaware County is not about the party itself. As much as I am a member of the Democratic Party, I would not say that this flip in Delaware County or in the local communities is specific to the party itself. It is specific to the engagement of the people who said we will no longer live without representation in our local governments. And that includes school boards and that includes township councils. And the number of people who said, I'm a voter, I'm a, maybe even I've donated to a candidate now and again. You know what? I'm going to run for office.
Wow.
And the number of good quality candidates who came forward in the last few years that there have been so many people trying to recruit those candidates for years, but they were busy or they weren't seeing it as an area to change their community because they thought when there's a Republican or any machine, to be honest, I'm sure there are Republicans or non-Democrats who listen to your show who understand there's a machine in Philadelphia as well.
Right. That's right.
And there's these organizations inside of Philadelphia that are doing exactly the same thing as the folks in Delaware County who are trying to change the culture of their own party. Mm-hmm. So, I think that's an important thing to do and to move your own party to the direction that you value, which includes addressing things like sexual assault inside your party, sexual assault in campaigns, equity in hiring inside the campaigns. Like we do need, our own party has to take care of that. And we have to be more inclusive. And we can't just say that we share those values without actually doing them. So it's not individual to Delaware County, but I think that's why Delaware County is sort of, like you said, being seen right now. Because these changes are all happening everywhere. And some places they're happening faster or slower than others. Delaware County was honestly just moving in that way for a few years, but the final push of having a terrible president and having people who wanted to engage and creating a structure for them to engage was a way that I think that really flipped it, and having amazing candidates. We were just really lucky this year. Delaware County got 3 new council women, all women. It is now not only all Democrat, but majority women.
Wow.
We have a, congresswoman. I have a female mayor. I have a female council president. I myself am the chair of the Upper Darby Democratic Party. We have a lot of women leaders in a place that 2-4 years ago we didn't. And I think that's really, women are leading this. And, we're seeing more and more. We got the first woman of color was elected to Delaware County Council, Monica Taylor. The first woman of color. And
Monica Taylor, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You told me recently a story about how she got involved and engaged. And this to me is like the quintessential story of somebody who, never saw herself in this position at all. And became motivated. And I think that this story is important because I think we can see all of ourselves in Monica's story.
I agree.
I think that it's such an important narrative to say because it speaks to the ability that we all have to become active and to shift, even if it's later in life. And when you finally say, this is not okay, this is not working, and I want to be of service to change things around. I see that as the Monica story, and I think that we can all be inspired by that.
Oh, I agree. I mean, Monica is a mom. She's a mom of a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. When I met her, she was still nursing her youngest. She was under 1 year old. And Monica was a professor, and she had moved to the community and was literally coming out of the Women's March saying, what can we do? What can I do? And I was talking to her about whether she wanted to run for, whether she wanted to run for judge of elections or something like that, because she just wanted to plug in and get involved. And I said, in Delaware County and all of Pennsylvania, we run our election where you go to vote. Those people who are running that site are elected, and they are doing it for a very small amount of money, and they're in there for 15 hours, and they're practically volunteers, and they give their time and effort to make elections function. And if they don't show up, the elections don't happen. Like, they are literally the boundary
Yeah.
between
Amazing.
democracy
That-
and
isn't that incredible?
non-democracy.
Wow. And I think probably most people don't know that.
And so if you want to do something, go help in your election. That people, it's a long day and they need breaks and they need someone to go inside and run.
Thanks
polling
for saying
places.
that and reminding me that at the next election I will help out and at the very least maybe bring some food.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's hard for
Yeah.
them to get it out, and it can be a very, especially in a presidential, will be a very busy day, and they may
Okay.
not get an opportunity to get, out of there.
such
So
an important point. Thanks for saying that. Yeah.
So that's what I was talking to her about. And then she walked into the Upper Darby Democrats' next meeting with her filled out petitions by voters. She had gone and got her signatures to get on school board. And I was like, welcome. I did not know her from, anyone else. And I thought, I hope she makes a good school board director. And then she turned around and knocked 4,000 doors for her own election and knocked it out of the park and got one of the highest number of votes. And then she ran for county council because she saw on school board that she was really working for economic development and workforce development opportunities for young people who can't or don't want to go to college, because we push kids into college and we push them into debt. And many of them, or some of them anyway, don't finish college, but they still have the debt. And it puts them so far behind.
Myself included. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so she wanted to work on workforce development opportunities where the county would have been a better opportunity. And so when she ran, she also then, as the first African-American woman to sit on that council, got the highest number of votes, 91,500 votes for
Incredible.
county council.
Incredible.
And we also elected the first African-American woman judge, and she is the first person of Muslim faith to sit on any court in Pennsylvania. Wow. And just imagine if you are someone who has to go into a court system, right? You already have to go through the criminal justice system, which is in itself a real disaster of a system in that it doesn't feel like a helping system to the people who are in it. There's not a lot of, like if you are having a drug issue, why are we putting people through the criminal justice system instead of a health-related system or something that can actually address their concerns? And then you go in front of a judge that has never experienced your life and has, probably been pretty politically connected, and in Delaware County has been politically connected to the Republicans. And it just doesn't feel like justice for people in Delaware County. So to elect our first Democrats ever, we elected 4. 3 of them are women, but to elect the first person who is not in the stereotype of Delaware County, but is actually reflective of a huge number of people in Delaware County, you'll finally be able to start seeing, I hope, more justice for people just through the experiences of those judges.
That's incredible, and it's a huge win, and I think it's an important story to tell because we're in a moment where it can feel hopeless, and that feeling of hopelessness, there's like a lack of inertia. This feeling like I can't go on. This is so absolutely traumatizing. There's nothing I can do, and I think people have the tendency or capacity to just give up, throw their hands in the air and give up. And so I think these stories out of Delaware County that you're telling right now are incredibly hopeful, and we need to hold on to them because, as you mentioned, I mean, yes, Barack Obama winning the presidency and being the first black president in office is hugely historic, but so are these wins in Delaware County, and I think that we can feel like this is progress. In spite of what might seem at times like we're going backwards as a nation.
You know what that reminds me of? When you used to have as an exam question,
Yeah.
are we moving forward or are we going in a constant cycle? Is history progressing?
Yeah.
And it's a very important question to consider because it may feel like progress right now, and if people get if they stop engaging, then it will no longer be it is only progress because we continue to push forward.
That's exactly right. So if that woman is listening, the one who held that sign that says if Hillary Clinton were in office, we'd be all in brunch, I hope she knows that no matter who is in office next, and even if it is her elected candidate, or her candidate that she voted for, that I would hope we all remain active and vigilant. I remember in Eisenhower's farewell speech to the nation, he said that really we're living in the military-industrial complex, and the only way that we can ensure that our democracy and liberty continues is that we have a well-informed and knowledgeable citizenry who's active and engaged. And I think that we had not had that.
Right.
And I think we are now. And even if it's Trump that galvanized people, whatever it is, Heather who went on and door knocked, I think that can't end. And I don't think it will. I think that because the structures were created, I think that, and there will be continuing, no matter who's elected in the presidency, as you mentioned, the local government is responsible for so much of our daily lives. And I think that we're starting to see that now. So we have to continuously be vigilant, continuously be tuned in, and be active citizens who are wondering how we can be of use.
Well, one of the things that has really stuck out to me, just as an example of that right now, is that the president has done an executive order that says that if your community is going to accept refugees into it, it used to be once the number was set, the United States accepts a certain number of refugees. These are vetted, folks from other dangerous places that are coming into the United States as asylum seekers. First of all, he set the number at 0 this year, so no refugees are going to come in 2020. That is not my America. But even the refugees who are already in the process, the executive order is now that every municipality that's going to accept them has to opt in to accept them, which means that the onerous of whether a community is going to opt in is now on those local elected officials, township council people, and mayors who have never thought about immigration before. That's not an area that they even have a lot of experience in. And it's a political hot potato to say to a community, hey, now you have to say that you are open to refugees. You know that the minute that a lot of those little communities do that, they are going to get a lot of heat from the conservatives or people who just don't want those other people here. When to them, they don't know those people. They've never probably even met a person from a refugee experience. They have a stereotype in their head. But it forces little communities to have political fights that they don't need to have. But this particular president is forcing it on them. How important then is it to me to have local elected officials who say, refugees are important to our community. And, these are humans who are experiencing something horrible and need to be embraced.
Amazing. Thank you so much for highlighting that, because I think it is crucial and another one of the million reasons why our local elections are so vital and important. So we're going to take a short break. We'll be back after this 1-minute break to talk more with Heather. Thanks. We'll see you soon.
Sometimes the things we do or say can make others feel hurt, excluded, or isolated. Everything you say and do creates an impact.
How am I supposed to save the whole world?
You can't think about saving the world. You have to think about saving one person.
Because of you, someone's entire life can change. You don't have to be a superhero to have a positive impact.
Friends?
Friends. Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma. I have a mentor, and she convinced me to continue my education. No one receives a diploma alone. If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, go get it. You can do it.
Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org.
Thanks, and welcome back to Thinking Constellationally, where we connect the dots between systems of oppression and between ourselves and our neighbors. I'm your host, Stephanie Sena, and I have one of my favorite humans on the planet in the studio with me today, Heather Boyd. Heather, with the remaining time we have left, I'd love if we could talk a little bit about the issues that are really close to your heart. If you could give us some information about them, and then also maybe some information about what the listeners can do if they also see these as important issues and want to get involved.
Thanks. Well, the number one issue that's closest to my heart in Pennsylvania specifically is public education funding. Stephanie's children are in the public school system in Philadelphia, and my children are in the public school system in Upper Darby, two places that are significantly underfunded, even in the whole of Pennsylvania. But I think a lot of people may not know is that Pennsylvania is one of the lowest funders. Their state gives the least amount of money to our public education system by percentage, which means a school district like Upper Darby that has 12,500 kids gets only 38% of its funding comes from the state. And the rest has to come from the local taxpayers, the local property owners. And you can imagine then that places like Upper Darby or like Darby or Yeadon, or where the value of the homes may not be growing as fast as other places, and their incomes may not be as high as obviously places like Radnor or Swarthmore. They have to bear the burden of the cost of education. And the other challenge in the state of Pennsylvania is that we do not have a funded education formula. We passed one in the last 3 years, but it isn't funded. So only about 7 or 8% of state dollars go through it. And a formula is based on how many children are in your district and how much their need is. So if you think about a place like Upper Darby, where it's a lot of families, a lot of young families, there's a high, even though the property taxes are high, the houses are affordable for families, or they may be renting, and they may have lots of kids. The lines around Upper Darby are static. So even if 11,000 children go to school there, or if 15,000 children live and go to school there, their funding doesn't change. Okay. Which means that there's no attachment of the amount of money that a child gets, or that funds a child. There's no relation to the number of children or their need right now. And so it means that the highest need communities, the communities like Upper Darby that have a very high number of English language learners, communities that have high special needs, special education designations, and don't forget that gifted children are also considered special education, then if there's no additional funding for them, they don't get what they need, which means that parents then are allowed, because it is their right, education is a right in this country, it is their right to then sue the district to get what their child needs. So these underfunded school districts can't provide what the children need sometimes, and then the parents are suing the school district to get what they need, and it just compounds these problems. And there's edges around the district. You can't increase, if the state doesn't increase the funding, the funding doesn't increase. And you don't get to decide how many kids you educate. It's whoever lives in your district. So Philadelphia, of course, is our largest district by far, and is underfunded, by millions and millions and millions of dollars. And Upper Darby alone is underfunded by $15 million every year. But the thing that surprises people is that Wallingford-Swarthmore School District is underfunded by the state of Pennsylvania. The only reason that they have the funding that they have is because their property owners have agreed to tax themselves at the highest rate. Wow. So they have the highest rate in Pennsylvania, so they raise their money locally.
But if you live in Swarthmore, you can likely afford those taxes, where you cannot if you live in a place like Upper Darby or in the Philadelphia district.
Exactly. And so we have this we call it the Hunger Games of education, right? Like, if you can't provide for your kids, then you have to, the district itself will get attacked essentially to make them pay more. Mm-hmm. And I personally am not a fan of charter schools because they do take money out of the public education system without any of the fail-safes. So I've watched charter schools go under, and those children have to go back into the traditional public schools, and they have to be reabsorbed with no additional resources. I've watched, especially the the cyber charter schools. Some children, across the board statistically, some of those schools are not educating our kids for an entire year. Now, that doesn't mean that every one of them is like that, but it's a systemic problem.
Oh, absolutely. I think that a short time ago, the majority of charter schools in Philadelphia were under investigation for like embezzlement or some kind of illegal fraud.
And they just don't have
happens all the time in Philadelphia and throughout the state. Yeah.
And they don't have a lot of safeguards for it.
That's right.
Because our state law is very lax. And so if you and I wanted to start a charter school right now and didn't have the best of intentions, we could make a lot of money and leave children uneducated.
I mean, and so charter schools are basically publicly funded, privately run, and don't have the same regulations that the public schools have. So my understanding is that charter schools can also pick and choose who they have in the classroom. There's a lottery system to get into most of these charter schools, and they are able to limit their class size, where the public schools should, and they have a cap, but they in Meredith, for example, I mean, that cap has been overwhelmed many times.
Yeah.
So
because what are you going to do if enough kids live in your catchment?
Yes.
You have to educate them regardless.
That's right. So I think that this is a problem. Another area in terms of the school funding in Philadelphia that I find problematic is that is all of the so in lieu of the state not properly funding these schools, when we are dependent on property taxes, then what you have in Philadelphia is that so many of these developers have what's called the tax abatement, so they're not actually paying taxes.
Right.
And if they were taxed, money would go to the schools, and it would make it so that our schools were not underfunded. But what is happening is, as an incentive to get these big developers in, city council passed the abatement, 10-year abatement sometimes that can be re-upped. So these people are not paying taxes for a decade, if not more. Right. And these developers are developing housing for the wealthiest. And then these homeowners who are in a wealthier bracket and have the resources and means are actually not paying taxes on their property, on their house. And then in addition to the fact that this Philadelphia School District cannot collect tax revenue from the building of new homes and home ownership in Philadelphia, you have Penn. Penn is an Ivy League that doesn't pay taxes because it's tax exempt.
Pay taxes. Villanova doesn't pay taxes.
Yeah. But while these schools don't pay taxes, that almost all of the Ivy Leagues pay pilot taxes, which is payment in lieu of taxes. Right. So that you can choose to pay, even though you're not made to. You're not obligated to. And most of the Ivy Leagues do that, except Penn. Now Penn has a massive endowment, and if they paid, for example, $2 million in taxes for Penn and their endowment, that would be actually a drop in the bucket. But for the Philadelphia School District, that could go so far in terms of remediating the asbestos that are in the schools, including in my own children's school, Meredith Elementary, where my son's teacher is sick with mesothelioma after having taught in that school for 17 years, and they found asbestos in the classroom where she taught my son. Right. So it makes me angry as a parent and as a human that Penn doesn't do that, and at the same time that Penn doesn't pay taxes. And if it did, it would be no major trauma to Penn, but a massive relief to Philadelphia District and Philadelphia's poorest kids, really. Right. But also, then what you have is they have a graduate school of education at Penn. This gets me
I've heard
angry.
this story.
And they don't offer scholarships, but if you are willing and able to pay, $30,000 and up for a 10-month program, you can walk away with a master's degree in education with no background in education prior to that, and then Penn places you in the Philadelphia District, and these teachers whose only qualification to getting into that program was basically that they could pay their way, then Philadelphia will place them, and these teachers have a high rate of turnover, burnout. They leave after 1 or 2 years.
Teachers in general.
They do. They do in general, more so in Philadelphia, but certainly within this program. Yeah. And I think that if Penn is going going to dump these teachers who might not be the best qualified, and I know that personally, then they do owe to the Philadelphia district. You know, it's a question of like what do we owe these schools really,
I
and
think,
more than what we're giving them, I think.
And I agree with you. And I didn't have any of the information you just told me about Penn specifically. I do know that systems exist that organizations will use, right? A Penn among many, right? Like there's like 16 or something colleges in Delaware County region, and I'm sure many of them, if not all of them, as nonprofits benefit for not paying taxes. But to the point of, I suppose, like systems that exist, those things would have to be changed legally, right?
That's
like
right.
that how nonprofits do or don't pay taxes and how they're designated is a systemic challenge. And we also have the challenge, I suppose, of the lack of support for teachers in
That's
this
right.
whole entire state. And so, you know, Pennsylvania has a high threshold for becoming a teacher, which is good in some ways, a lot of education requirements. Your schools are full of, next to hospitals, they are the most educated buildings full of people in our state, in our entire communities. And yet they struggle with being paid well. They
That's
struggle
right.
with their with the buildings that they have to teach in. I mean,
So no wonder they're getting burnt out. They're not
Yes.
given the resources that they need
Exactly.
to be successful.
Exactly. And that starts in a lot of ways. While we can say that a lot of individual organizations do need to step up and address some of these concerns in their own backyards, we also need to look at the system that the state of Pennsylvania allows for those things
That's
to
right.
function, and they have to change it. And right now, the Speaker of the House in Pennsylvania, House of Representatives, Mike Turzai, he would like to completely disassemble public education. He seems to be hell-bent on privatizing the entire system. And that's our leader.
Yeah, and I think
in
it goes to this question of
Pennsylvania.
what kind of country do we want?
And what kind of state do we want?
Yeah.
And what kind of local community do we want?
When we say we are a democracy, do we believe that? And this question of like, how do you have a democracy without public education? I feel like
You
that is the
can't.
backbone of
You
a
have.
democracy.
I
And
think from the institution, from the beginning of the institution on. I mean, you were quoting Eisenhower on that. Thomas Jefferson said that.
Yeah.
And while he's a problematic historical figure in his own right, he, did say at the very beginning of this country, we need publicly educated citizens, not to get jobs, but to be publicly educated citizens.
That's right.
And we have moved hard away
Yes.
from using our public education system for the good of citizens, and we've turned it towards the benefit of employers.
That's exactly right.
And we're a capitalist system, and personally, that's not my favorite form of economic governance, but it is where we are, and our government has allowed a lot of businesses to benefit from all of what we as a community provide, including our children. Mm-hmm. And I think that if we could turn even some of the direction towards building a citizenry, and I think if we can't do it in schools, then we do it outside of schools, but we can't abdicate it to the businesses to benefit from the education that we give our kids. And we've pushed our kids towards science and technology and math and college. All of those things are wonderful, but they're not everything. And we've taken away music and art and citizenship. And in the state of Pennsylvania, you don't even have to take a citizenship class or a government class to graduate from high school. And so no wonder when I knock on your door and you don't know who runs your government, how would you? So we do need to I think, systemically look at our education system, starting first and foremost with funding it. And, leaving these places that are more likely to be places where people live in poverty, more likely that the racial component of the lack of funding in Pennsylvania is the most disastrous part that we cannot turn away from. It can't just be about economics and need. It also has to be about racial justice as well. And most of the places that are underfunded are also places that are racial disparity. So what are we going to do? We're wasting entire generations of incredibly important people in our community that are not getting that education. So I think that first and foremost, it's the most important thing that Pennsylvania has to do. And it's the thing that's nearest and dearest to my heart. And when I talk to people, it is the most important thing that they care about, because in the end, they care about their property taxes and they care about how much it's costing them, and that other people are benefiting. Out west, those schools are out west of Pennsylvania are overfunded. They get more money per child in many, many, many counties, and our most populated counties, Delaware County, Montgomery County, Bucks County, Chester County, and of course the city of Philadelphia, get less per child than schools all over the state. And that's a state. We need to change that system.
Okay. So you've convinced me that that is crucial for our children. It's crucial if we care about equity, if we care about democracy, if we care about children and families, and justice and issues of race and class. It all ties into education. So with that, what can we do? What can we do if we recognize that this is so important?
The challenge, of course, is that in Harrisburg hates Philadelphia and identifies the whole southeast region as Philadelphia. Like Mike Terzi's.
And is that because Harrisburg is mostly Republican?
Yes, it is a Republican
Philadelphia
majority.
Always goes Democrat.
Yeah.
Okay.
And now, of course, even the regions around Philadelphia go Democrat, and most of our state representatives support public education funding, even in Chester County and Delaware County, regardless of party. But Harrisburg hates Philadelphia. And I do think that Philadelphia has been trying to address this concern by funding its own public education, which is why they had the soda tax. But I think the abatement is a problem. Talking to your own local officials, I always bring it back to call them. They get a lot of negative calls. Call them with ideas. Call them with opportunities. Invite them to roundtables to talk to your school communities, because they need to hear you, but they also want to hear you. I'm always surprised at the number of elected officials who are like, I didn't know about that and I didn't get invited. I wouldn't have known about it if I don't hear from the community. So be proactive and just reach out to them. Some of them may hate me for saying this right now. They're not all as, responsive as each other, but I think that they didn't get into this business, hopefully, to not be, part of the representative.
And if they didn't get into it to be,
See
then,
ya.
goodbye, then we have to vote them out. But Mark Squilla, who's my city council person, he's incredibly responsive, and he's a partner on my project, so he was responsive to me. But I've heard this by and large by constituents across the district.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that if somebody wants to speak to him, has a question about services, resume, letter of recommendation, like whatever it is.
But not everybody agrees with him,
That's
and
right.
people are going to run against him.
That's right.
And you do have the opportunity and the responsibility to review who those people are.
That's exactly right.
And don't just take I know that last name, or the party supports this person, or, try to talk to them.
That's
and
exactly
find opportunities. And their challengers are going to be looking to talk to you. So, they're going to be maybe in some ways easier to find.
Yeah. But I think to your point, I think it is important to reach out to your local, your elected officials, and that mostly they will be interested in getting back to you. And if not, you work to vote them out.
Yeah.
But you're an inspiration, Heather. Thank you so much for talking to us about your journey here, the issues that matter to you, and how maybe we can also be involved and engaged so that we can be truly the democracy that we want to be.
I'm so glad you had me here. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Heather. This was a pleasure. I can't wait to have a get together with you again and lay in your bed and read books with you while our children destroy your house. Okay, well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Thinking Constellationally with me, your guest, Stephanie Sena, and today's special guest, Heather Boyd. You are listening to USALA Media, and we will be back next week. Take care. Bye.